Welcome, CUSD families, to our last day of our virtual college fair, and boy, is it a day. We have so many great events. To kick us off today, we are going to be covering financial aid. We have an expert speaker here today from Saddleback College. Katelynn Cope is joining us, and she will be taking over shortly. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself to you. My name is Bea. I am a college and career counselor with the district with CUSD-Futureology. I'm so excited to be facilitating today's event. Let's go into some housekeeping items, okay? So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this presentation is being recorded. This means that you will be able to reference back to this recording at a later time in case you need to look at it, or in case you need to excuse yourself early. It will be posted on our website as well as on our YouTube channel by the end of next week. So just keep your eyes peeled for that. You are all muted and your videos are off, so we can't hear or see you. Your job is just to take all of this information in and just soak it all in and enjoy. If you have questions, please utilize the Q&A function so that we can answer your questions during our Q&A period at the end of Katelynn's presentation. Finally, we will be sending you a feedback survey via Calendly, which is what you registered through. If you could please complete that survey to let us know your feedback for today's session, we would greatly appreciate that. And without further ado, I'd like to pass this off to our expert speaker, Katelynn from Saddleback. Katelynn, welcome.
Hi, thanks, Bea, for the introduction. My name is Katelynn Cope. I am a financial aid specialist here at Saddleback College, as Bea said. I have been with Saddleback for about 7 years. But I have been in financial aid for about 10. Just so you know, I am in the office right now. So if you happen to hear any sounds in the background or any talking, that's just outside my door. So I apologize if there's any sounds that you hear in the background. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and get started. So a lot of students will ask me, why should I apply for financial aid? So we really, as financial aid specialists, we're not going to know what you qualify for until you actually apply for either the FAFSA or the DREAM Act. The reason for that is they take the information that you put in the FAFSA and run it through a 40-page calculation. So the computer can do that in 20 seconds. That will take me about 4 days. So definitely make sure to do the application so you can kind of find out what you qualify for and be able to ask the financial aid specialist questions. We do offer help here at the Saddleback Financial Aid Office with the FAFSA or DREAM Act application. It is just a walk-in, first come, first serve situation, or you can visit us during our scheduled Zoom hours for one-on-one assistance. We can help you no matter which school you're going to. So if you have just any general questions about the application, we can definitely help you with that. It doesn't take long to apply. It's usually about 30 to 45 minutes, and it's absolutely free to apply. The next step would be, of course, we're going to talk about the 2 different types of applications. So the FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, and that's for U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens. So an eligible non-citizen would be somebody who has a green card or certificate of naturalization or asylum. The DREAM Act application would be for those students who qualify under the AB 540 laws of the state of California. So they may not be a documented student, but have lived in California for a year and 1 day and have graduated from a California high school. So you should never do both of these applications. It's one or the other based on your citizenship status. Both of them should be done at the .gov websites you see here on the page. The .coms and .orgs tend to be scam sites, so be very careful when applying. The FAFSA is a universal application, which means it can be used anywhere in the United States. So the FAFSA will allow you to add any 10 schools in the United States for you to apply to. If you are applying to more than 10 schools, it's only 10 at a time on the FAFSA, but you can always go back and edit it later to remove or add new schools. The DREAM Act allows you to add any 10 schools in the state of California. So the DREAM Act doesn't extend beyond the state. but the same rule applies to the Dream Act. So it's 10 at a time, but if you're planning on applying to more than 10, you can always go back and edit that one as well to remove or add a new school. So on our next slide, this is what it looks like. The one closest, well, I'm trying to say, sorry, I've been in a classroom all day. Yes, this one here with the blue background, that is the FAFSA page. The one on the other side is our Dream Act page. So when you log in to the FAFSA, the Dream Act, you should be seeing something along these lines. Though I noticed today that they changed the background just a little bit to some more updated pictures. But it should be a .gov website once again. So there are two main requirements to qualify for financial aid. The first is the cost of attendance of the school. Well, first of all, let me backtrack. I apologize. This formula on this step one here is basically how we determine your financial need and how much we can potentially pay a student through financial aid funds. So what happens is they take the cost of attendance of the school. So that would be different from every school you're attending. So from community college to private schools, the cost of attendance is going to be a lot different at each individual school. So you may have to do this multiple times. Then they subtract what's called your expected family contribution. This number is generated at the end of your FAFSA or your Dream Act application. It's usually located in the lower right-hand corner of your confirmation page when you finish the applications. And that's going to equal your remaining need and what we can potentially pay you from financial aid funding. Keep in mind that the expected family contribution number does not take into consideration what state you live in. So they're not taking into the cost of living into the expected family contribution because they use a national average, not a state by state average. The next step would be up to the student. So students, you have to maintain a minimum 2.0 cumulative GPA and pass 67% of all courses you attempt at the college. If you fall below these standards, you could lose your financial aid eligibility and may have to appeal to get it back. And under our eligibility criteria, you have to have a high school diploma, GED, or the equivalent to qualify for financial aid. So if you're a high school student taking college courses, you cannot get financial aid until you actually graduate. Then, of course, there is if you are a high school student taking classes at the community college, you can always contact our admissions to see if they have the high school fee waiver for you. It's a little bit different, and I don't handle that here in our office, but you can always call our admissions and records office for that. For financial aid purposes, you would need to be enrolled in a degree, certificate, or transfer program. So essentially, you can't just be coming to school, taking 1 or 2 classes here and there just for fun. To get financial aid, you have to be working towards some type of educational goal. And then, of course, legal requirements. Unfortunately, our Dream Act students don't qualify for federal aid. Only our FAFSA students who are U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens. So this slide here is our federal aid slide. The federal aid on this slide is all the free money from the federal government that you're eligible for. Keep in mind that the Pell Grant amount is for this current academic year. It will most likely change when you go to college next year. It usually has been going up. The trend has been for it to go up each year, though I can't say the same for next year. It's always good to double check later on. Usually that number is released mid to late July. So July 2022 is probably when that number would be expected to change. The amount you'll get of this federal Pell Grant for each year is dependent upon how many units you're taking. So if you're a full-time or part-time student, your plans to attend school for a full academic year or less, so we can't pay you a full year's worth in one semester. And it's important to also keep in mind you cannot receive Pell Grant from more than one school at a time. So you have to choose which school you're going to get your financial aid at. So that includes, like, if you're going from, if you're taking classes at IVC and Saddleback, you have to choose which school you want to get your financial aid from. You cannot get it at both schools at the same time. So on top of the federal Pell Grant is this federal Student Equal Opportunity Grant. It's an additional $200 to $800 max a semester on top of your Pell Grant. Not all schools will participate in this program. Saddleback does, but if there's another school that you have on your list, they may not have this on there. So you might see it on some of your award notices, but not others. So keep that in mind. There's also federal work study, which is an on-campus job opportunity where you can work for a stipend up to $2,000 a semester. It's not only good for you to do the work study for, of course, financial aid purposes. It's also a great way to build your resume. I did federal work study for my undergraduate. I was a campus tour guide at Cal State Fullerton. And then I also worked in the transfer center my final year in college there. And it was a great way for me to earn some money, of course, to help pay for my tuition. But it was also a great way for me to go ahead and have the opportunity to have some references for future job opportunities. So the federal loan program, this is the only type of aid I'm going to talk about today that has to be repaid after the student graduates. Like the Pell Grant, the interest rate for student loans changes every year. It's kind of like a roller coaster. It goes up and down each year. So I couldn't tell you if it's on a trend for upwards or downwards. It came up from last year when we were in the depths of the pandemic. It was a little bit lower. This year it went up a bit. So my expectation is that it would go up, but I have no idea. But this year the interest rate is 3.734%. You have to be enrolled in a minimum of 6 units of credit per semester with a 2.0 GPA to qualify for loans. And you don't have to have a pre-established credit score to get loans. But there is a difference between the loans. The subsidized loan will pay your interest while you're in school. The unsubsidized loan will not. So for the subsidized loan for a freshman student, it's up to $3,500 for the year, not per semester, per year. The unsubsidized loan is up to $6,000 for the year, but keep in mind that's the one you're paying interest on. So my recommendation with loans is if you don't need them, don't take them. If you do need them, take only what you need and start first with the subsidized loan. So moving into the state portion of the presentation, and let me go back and kind of backtrack a little bit. FAFSA is basically an overall application. So what I mean by that is by applying for the FAFSA, you're applying for the federal aid, state aid, and any other type of aid that is dependent upon you doing the application. So you don't have to do a separate application for the Cal Grant. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. Same thing for DREAM Act students. Your DREAM Act application is your application to all the state aid. So you don't have to do a separate thing. The Cal Grant, though, does have a deadline. So you have to submit your FAFSA or your DREAM Act before March 2nd of next year to qualify for it. Otherwise, you will miss out on it for 1 year. So the Cal Grant varies at different places. At the community colleges, it's usually about $1,600 a year. At the four-year schools, it can go up to around $3,000, maybe even $4,000 a year in Cal Grant funding. And keep in mind that if you're a FAFSA student, federal aid and state aid stack on top of each other, so you can get both at the same time. If you're a local area student, so within Capo USD or Saddleback USD, I believe, the high schools will normally send this GPA verification form that's listed on the screen. That's usually sent on your student's behalf to the California Student Aid Commission, unless you opted out of that option. Then you would have to send it on your own. But otherwise, it's usually sent on the student's behalf. So on the next slide, at the bottom, we have the Student Success Completion Grant. That's a supplemental grant from the Cal Grant. So it's basically additional money on top of your Cal Grant if you're a full-time student. So meaning you're taking 12 or more units of credit. So if you take 12 to 14 units of 12 to 14 units a semester, is an additional $649. If you take 15 or more units, that's 15, not 50, it's 15 or more units, it's an additional $1,500 a semester. So something to keep in mind, a little extra money if you go full time. This, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't quite finished. Thank you. This second one in the middle is the California Promise Grant. This is only for community colleges, and it's not to be confused with our Saddleback Promise program. So I'll go over the difference in a second. But the California Promise Grant is from the state of California for any California resident who reaches a certain income threshold, and it waives your tuition up to $46 per unit, which is the current cost per unit at the community colleges. So it essentially makes tuition free, but nothing else. The Saddleback Promise program waives all things. So tuition, books, supplies, materials, and that's only for our students who are local to the districts. So our local area students, graduating high school seniors only, are offered the opportunity to apply for the Saddleback Promise program in addition to the FAFSA or the DREAM Act. The FAFSA or the DREAM Act is also a requirement of the Promise program. So that's a whole nother reason to do it ahead of time, so that when you apply for the Promise program, you're already one step ahead of a lot of other people. And then finally, on this slide, the Chafee Grant is for students who are in foster care between their 16th and 18th birthday in the state of California, who have not yet turned 22 before July 1st of the year they'll be attending college. It's usually an additional $2,000 a semester for these students. So it's on top of the FAFSA or the DREAM Act. You would also have to do the California Chafee Grant Program application, and that can usually be found on your college's webpage. And you would just have to turn that in as per requirements on the application. And then you would be able to qualify for that additional $2,000 a semester. So we'll skip this slide. I'm so sorry, I forgot to remove that one. DREAM Act students, you do not have to have a DACA status to qualify for the DREAM Act. It is not a requirement. However, I would recommend that you complete your DREAM Act before March 2nd, because otherwise you'll miss out on the Cal Grant or the Student Success Completion Grant. So without those two, you're left with the California Promise Grant, which again is only for community colleges, and any state scholarships that are available. So please, please, please make sure to do your DREAM Act application before March 2nd.
Katelynn, quick question for you in the Q&A that I thought you might want to answer live, because it's having to do with the Promise program. Somebody asked about income qualifications, and I thought you might want to speak to that for everybody in here for the Promise program.
The Promise program, I'm not sure of the qualifications for it for next year, because that is not my area of expertise. We do have a web page. So if you go to saddleback.edu and go to the Student Success tab at the top, there should be a drop down, and on that drop down will be the Promise program page, and that should have the most updated information, and you can go through all the requirements there. But from what I understood the last time, there wasn't an income requirement, but that may have changed. So you'll want to make sure to go to that web page for the most accurate information.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So here we go. If there's any parents on the presentation here, you're going to hear a very scary F word here, which is FERPA, which stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which means once your student reaches the college level, you do not have any rights to call on their behalf unless we have written permission from you to do so, from your student to do so. So the student would have to turn in what's called a FERPA release form in order for us to be able to talk to you about their account. The reason I mention this is because if your student answers no to all these questions on the screen that you see here now, they're considered a dependent student, and yours and your student's tax information would be required on the FAFSA or DREAM Act application. If they answer yes to one or more of these questions, they're considered independent and would only have to turn in their tax information. So even if your student is a dependent and your information's on the FAFSA or the DREAM Act, we cannot talk to you about your student's account. Please do not call without them or come in without them, because by law, we cannot tell you any information about their account. This is a big, big, big no-no for us. I don't want to get hauled off to federal prison. So please make sure to talk to your student about their financial aid statuses and things like that, or get that verbal release completed with the school of your choice so that you can get that information. Students who maybe have say, I answered no to all these questions, but I don't have contact with my parents. You can look into, if you have documented circumstances, you can provide proof for, so like abuse, neglect, or other documented circumstances. You can do what's called a dependency override with the school of your choice, and they can replace your dependency status to independent status based on that appeal. So that would be important to do. Also too, for purposes of filling out the FAFSA or the DREAM Act, so for 22-23's FAFSA, you'll be using 2020 tax information. So maybe that's not representative of your current household income. So if you've had a reduction of income or something has happened where the income has changed in the household, you would still fill out the FAFSA or the DREAM Act with your 2020 tax information, but notify the school that you're going to be attending that there's been a change. And for us, it's called a family contribution appeal. For other schools, it could be called a special circumstance. Check in with them to see if you can replace 2020's tax information with 21's tax information once it's been filed. So applying for financial aid. So we're going to go over in the next couple slides creating an FSA ID, which I'll explain in the next slide. We'll go over filling out the applications and then of course following up with the school you're planning on attending. So for students who are FAFSA students, so FSA ID only applies to FAFSA students, by the way. On the next slide, we have what it is. So the FSA ID is basically going to serve as your electronic sign-in and signature to the FAFSA application. So it's going to be your login information and your signature for the application. You do have to have your social security number, your full legal name. This cannot be nicknames or preferred names or anything like that. It has to be your full legal name that's on your social security card and your date of birth. Please don't make the mistake that a lot of my college students are doing right now and putting today's date as your date of birth. I can't begin to tell you how many times I've had to have people call the Department of Education because they put today's date as the date of birth. Double check this information and write it down in a safe place, because you'll be using the same FSA ID throughout your educational career, because each year you have to redo a FAFSA or a DREAM Act for each academic year you're going to school. It does not auto renew for you. You have to do it over again each year that you're going to be attending. On the next slide, if you are a dependent student, one of your parents is also going to have to create an FSA ID. So if your parent has already created an FSA ID for themselves, for either they went to college or you have an older sibling that went to college, they can still use that one, but you have to have your own. And please, 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 students and parents, make sure you're using separate email accounts. Do not use the same email account for yours and your parents' FSA ID, because that's going to cause a lot of problems for you later on. Also, students, make sure you're not using your high school email address. Those will expire after you graduate. So make sure you're using a personal email address to create your FSA ID, because if you get locked out for any reason, they would send you a lockout email. And if you can't access that email, you're going to be calling the Department of Education and you may be on the phone for a while. So it could be a whole bunch of mess. So be careful when you're creating those accounts. If your parent or can't create an FSA ID, either they don't have a social or they are just having a lot of trouble with it, you can always go into your FAFSA and select the option to sign a paper signature page. This will print out a physical signature page. Your parent would sign it and date it and send it to the PO box number at the bottom of the page. Do not take it to your school's financial aid office. They cannot send it for you because of that FERPA violation. So make sure to send it to that PO box number to make sure that your parent's signature gets there, because without that, the FAFSA will not be complete. So after you submit your FAFSA or your DREAM Act, it's never ever the final step. There's always going to be additional documentation, and how that documentation is presented to you is going to depend upon the school you're attending. Saddleback would notify you via email what additional documents you're required to turn in at our portal, which I listed the link to there. This is kind of a screenshot of what it would look like. The picture here under the congratulations, and there's that little yellow caret. That would be where you would be able to see the form. And then there's this white check mark that would appear once you submit it. Everything is done online here at Saddleback. There's no paper applications, there's no paper forms or anything like that. Our processing time ranges range from 6 to 8 weeks, because currently right now there's 6 of us doing about 26,000 student files. So it does take us a bit of time to get through them. But other schools' processing timeframes may be even greater than ours. So it's important to check in when you see that there's documents owing. Get those in as soon as possible and call the school to find out the processing timeframes so that you can plan ahead to budget for school. So scholarships. So this is the fun part of the presentation, I promise. I know it's really dry information. So scholarships, there's a lot of different ways you can find scholarships. The first thing I tell graduating high school seniors to do is please, please, please contact your high school counseling office or guidance office. They usually have scholarships for graduating high school seniors from the local area. So you won't find those anywhere online or at the colleges. Those are only through the high school that you can get those. And they're only for when you're a graduating senior. So be aware of those. Check your counseling websites, the guidance websites. They have a lot of great resources for you there. Check too with your employer. So students, if you're working, check with your employer and see if there's any scholarship opportunities there. Or if you're a dependent student, check with your parents to see if they have any possibility of scholarships through their work for you. So for example, my dad worked for LA County Fire Department. Because I was his dependent, I got $1,000 scholarship because I showed proof that I was a full-time student and that I was going to college at the time. So that was something that maybe your parents have that they can get for you, something through their work. Check too, when you go to visit your colleges, check with the department you want to major in, see if they have any scholarships that might not have been presented to the financial aid office. That's always a good one to do. And then of course, check internet websites, which we'll go over in a second. But I always like to notify you to be wary of scholarship scams. So one of those scams is usually when they'll ask you to pay like an entrance fee or something like that to submit a scholarship application. You should never have to pay for free money. And you should never, ever give a scholarship your social security information. They should never, ever need that from you. Normally the checks and things like that are sent to your school or to you at your current address. They should never need your social security number, your banking information, things like that. So just be wary of those when you're going through the websites. This next set of websites that we have here have been checked out by our district to be safe sites. And I always like to stress that scholarships aren't always related to your academic standing. So they're not always related on your GPA or your essay writing ability. Some of these are just based off silly things. So one of them that I did was through fastweb.com. And to keep in mind, this was a really long time ago because I'm starting to get a little ancient. But I did one on FastWeb. I got one for having brown eyes. I took a picture of my eyes. I wrote a 1-paragraph essay about why it was important to go to school, and I got $600. I've heard of ones for doing the best Taco Bell wrap, the best duct tape prom dress. One of my friends got one years ago when she graduated from high school for the best purse made out of recycled materials. There's just a lot of different ones out there. It is like having a part-time job searching for scholarships, but it's definitely worth your time. You know, even $100 scholarship can help you to not take out student loans. So that's something I always tell people is, you know, definitely look, see what's out there, see what's available for you to apply to. These search engines go year round, so they don't ever end. So you don't have like a certain time frame you have to apply by. All the scholarships are going to have their very own deadlines and rules of disbursement. So the way they pay them out, those should be listed on the scholarship itself, because we don't know. There's so many, there's millions and millions of these. We don't know how each one of them pays. They all pay a little bit differently. Usually it's to you directly or to the school for them to disperse out to you. It's just going to depend on the scholarship itself. So the next page is successful tips. So apply early. Make sure to make that priority deadline of March 2nd to maximize the amount of aid that you'll be eligible to receive. Ask questions. So visit either our financial aid office here at Saddleback or the school of your choice, and make sure to check in with them to see what might be available. We also offer that free help I was talking about earlier. If you get stuck on your FAFSA or your DREAM Act, you can always call us or come in person for assistance. And then finally, real quick, just a note about financial literacy. So there's this link to cashcourse.org on this page. I always recommend checking that out because it goes over budgeting, saving, spending, different things like that. They have a great tool that's called the, budgeting tool. And I used it for myself when I first started here and realized how much money I was spending on coffee, which was about $3,000 a year, which was outrageous. I ended up saving that money for a year and ended up paying off my car. So something kind of fun to use, kind of get a better idea of what you're using your money for and how to save it a little bit better. And we'll skip this slide, sorry. That one is for my college ones. And this is my contact information. So if you have a personal question that you maybe don't feel comfortable asking here in the chat or any other type of reason, you can always reach out to me. It can take me 24 to 48 hours to respond to you. I am usually on a Zoom presentation or at a high school right now, most days of the week, at least the month of October and a little bit into November. But I will try and get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Just please, please, please make sure to provide your name and contact information. I know that sounds funny, but I've had that before where people just send me an email and I have no way of getting back to them if the email comes back rejected. So just make sure to provide some contact information so I can get back in touch with you. So finally, are there any questions?
Yes.
A few. Okay.
Let me start them off. So we had a question going back to FERPA. Okay. So somebody asked about the verbal release. I think he had mentioned something about a verbal release, and I think they needed some more clarification on that.
Okay, so a verbal release would be a one-time only. So you would have to be like on a telephone and you have your student right next to you and they say, yes, you have my permission to speak to my parent about my account. Or they can be on the phone with you can be on the phone with your student. As long as the student gives us verbal permission to speak to you, we can do that. Or same thing in the office, you could say, this is my, the student could say, this is my dad. I want you to be able to speak to him about my account. And we can go from there. The FERPA release form is going to be different places on different schools' websites. You usually have to ask for it. And a lot of times each individual department on campus has to have their own FERPA form. So keep that in mind. It's a lot of legwork if you want to do that for every area of the college, because a lot of them we have to have our own form to show our auditors. So please, please, please make sure you're checking in and doing that early on, because it's going to make things easier so that we can make a note of it in our system, that we can talk to your parent or whoever they want to talk to, parent, aunt, uncle, whoever it is that grandma, we've had them all.
It's definitely it's a big transition, right, for all of our students in here, because you go from getting used to an adult advocating for you to this weird in between when you're kind of a freshman in college, right, where you still might need a little extra help, but eventually you are going to be doing this as an adult. So definitely a difficult transition, but you're going to get into the swing of things, as you get more used to being a student in college. But those are some really good questions. Another question, which is, I think let's address it two ways, right? So somebody's asking, when should we apply, senior year or junior year, right? So for the FAFSA for college, that's senior year, right?
All the time.
Yes, so just seniors. So you don't have, if you're a junior in here, you do not worry about completing a FAFSA for college. It's not the time. If you are a junior and you're asking about scholarships, there are scholarships that can be available for eligible juniors, even sophomores or freshmen. So sites that Katelynn shared earlier, like FastWeb, College Board, you can filter out oftentimes who can be eligible for those scholarships. And if it indicates that it can be a junior or sophomore or freshman, then go for it. There's no harm in applying now. Katelynn, anything you want to add to that?
Not really. I think you covered it pretty well.
Awesome. That was amazing, by the way, Katelynn. So much information and so timely. We definitely have time for some more Q&A if anybody wants to pop in.
It went a little fast.
No, that was great. I think it was a really good introduction to what this whole process is going to be. And with the understanding that families have access to Saddleback, they have access to their guidance teams at their high schools and our Futureology team. So there's definitely a lot of support after today. Any other questions, my friends? We definitely have time, so don't be shy. I'll give everybody just a few more seconds to kind of process their thoughts to see if they do have any questions. And if you don't, that's perfectly okay. We can wrap up a little bit early, and just know that this recording of this session will be available on our website, on the College Fair page, as well as on our YouTube channel. We'll have a College Fair playlist. Okay, let's see here. Question, do we need to know what school we're going to before applying for scholarships?
No, not necessarily. You can apply for scholarships at any time. Later on, once you get accepted at a school, you may have to notify the scholarship which school you're going to, because if they send it directly to the school, they're going to need to know where to send it to. So you might have to update them with that. Otherwise, like most of them, like I said, will usually send it to you directly as a student, and to use wherever you want. But the ones that do require a school, make sure to get in contact with them and tell them, hey, please, please, please send it to this school. And they'll get it to that financial aid office. Great question.
Another question here. If I have two students in college, how does the EFC work? Is it split in half for the two students? That's a good question.
Well, it basically takes into consideration for your EFC, or the expected family contribution. It's going to balance it out, so to speak, saying, okay, this person has two people in college, so we're going to reduce the expected family contribution based on that part of their life. So the EFCs could still be different for your students, because if one of them has a job and one of them doesn't have a job, one of them is going to be higher than the other. So the student's tax information is going to be counted into that as well, but it will take into account that you have two students in college that are currently going. Hopefully that kind of makes a little more sense.
Thank you. And we did have a question from a parent about Options for financial aid outside of federal and state options. Can you talk generally about the private loan process? And Katelynn, if you want to share anything about that, you're welcome to, but I have an amazing webinar recording from Sally May about this particular subject, and I'm going to put it in the chat for everybody. So give me just a second.
Okay, yeah, unfortunately, I can't speak to that because it's against our school policy to
Yes.
talk about private loans. But hopefully, you can always do your own research. I always say to check too with your bank and see what they have to offer.
Yeah.
But other than that, I can't really go into too many details.
Okay, so I just put a recording of an incredibly useful webinar that I attended through WACAC, the Western Association of College Admission Counselors. They had a conference in the spring, and representatives from Sally May presented on filling in the gaps, right, for families who didn't necessarily qualify for a need-based aid. They had some really great recommendations on how to fill that financial gap. So I put that in the chat. Please watch that. It's incredibly informative and can really shed some light on things like 529 savings plans, on private loans, on whether or not that's a good idea based on, your particular circumstance. So please watch that as a start. Another question, if we get a good amount of scholarships, will the school lessen their financial aid?
It is a possibility. So basically what they do is they take into account the free money first. So they're going to say, okay, this student got X amount in scholarships, so we're going to subtract that from their financial need. Then if they go after Pell Grant after that, they'll say, okay, they still need money. We're going to give them this amount of Pell Grant, and so on and so forth. So if you have like, $30,000 in scholarships, then yeah, unfortunately, the financial aid aspect would kind of go away for that year. You wouldn't lose that eligibility. It would just kind of roll into a pot for the next year, the next term that you might qualify for. But if you have like a very, very large amount of scholarships, that will affect the financial aid. If it's, $1,000 here, $1,000 there, it's not going to make too big of a difference. As long as it doesn't exceed your cost of attendance, then you'll still be able to qualify for at least some financial aid.
Thank you. Let's see here. Do you know how much you qualify for in financial aid before submitting the application, or would that be after the submission?
It's always after submission. The reason for that is, like I said, it goes into a 40-page formula. So all that information you enter in there, it goes into this big 40-page math formula. I'm not a math major. So it would take me about 4 days to figure it out. And I can't even imagine what it would take for, like a parent or a student to figure it out. That's why we always recommend to do the FAFSA or the DREAM Act application, because a computer can do it for you in just a couple of seconds. It'll usually at the end on your confirmation page, it'll give you an estimated amount of financial aid. That's never a guarantee of an award. I always like to stress that that's the estimated amount of aid that you may qualify for. It's never a guarantee. The guarantees come from the college itself, not from FAFSA or DREAM Act.
Right. Thank you, Katelynn. So how soon will the recording be available for the session? Again, we will be posting this on our website and on our YouTube channel by the end of next week. We have 23 recordings to process and edit as a team. There are only 3 of us right now, so thank you for your grace and patience, but we are going to work on getting those officially uploaded by the end of next week. No later than the Monday of the following week, but we are working hard on getting those ready for you. So please check back by the end of next week on our website. Another question for you, can a parent apply for a scholarship on behalf of a student?
I don't believe so, no. I believe it's the student that has to do so because of that FERPA.
Yeah. It's really good practice for students to begin the process of applying for things like scholarships. And especially if they're a junior, it gives them a really nice kind of practice run on what it is to apply for something competitively, right? It applies to also what it feels like to apply for colleges, to have a deadline, to have to respond to possibly some personal insight questions or statements, right? And maybe obtaining a letter of recommendation. And so it's actually great practice for a junior to just look for 1 or 2 scholarships to apply to. to get their feet wet and to get exposed to that, but definitely encourage our students to do that for sure. Obviously with the help of adults if they need it, but really great practice for students, definitely. Okay, my friends, we have about 1 minute left before we have to wrap up and make room for our next session of the evening. Do we have any other questions for Katelynn as we wrap up? And if not, thank you all so much for being with us this evening. We wish all of you the best of luck in your college admissions and application journey. One last question, are there any benefits for first gen students? The short answer is it depends on the institution. There might be some opportunities for you as a first gen student. For example, at the Cal States, right, and the UCs, some of the UCs offer an educational opportunity program, EOP. That program is designated for typically first gen low income students. And it's a program that students can apply for while applying for college to gain extra support while in college to make sure that they graduate on time. This can include tutoring. It can even include financial assistance as well, in addition to just general support services while they're in school.
I know Saddleback does have an EOPS department, Extended Opportunity Program Services as well. So that's something that you can definitely check out too. Sometimes too, I've heard of the four-year universities having opportunities such as scholarships and things like that for first gen students, but you would have to contact the school's financial aid office. I know at the community college, we don't necessarily, aside from that EOPS office here on campus, we don't have anything in particular at this time for that.
It will depend on the institution, but outside of the institutional support as well, you can look for scholarships targeted for first generation students too. There will be plenty of those as well. Okay, my friends, well, we are at time. So thank you so much for being with us. Recordings will be up. We're hoping by the end of next week. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for being with us. And finally, thank you to Katelynn for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule to be here for our families. We really appreciate you. And have a wonderful evening, everybody. It's almost the weekend. Hang in there. All right.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.